Okay. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Advanced APA workshop. My name is Alan Kingsley. I am one of the academic success counselors here on the graduate team at Post, and I work mainly with MBA students. But if you've called in, we may have spoken. I'm going to be talking tonight about helping you with citations for your papers, in-text citations, reference pages, things like that. We are also going to be recording this, so you can always get a copy of this after the fact if you want to go back and look at something. In addition, I'm going to drop my email address in the chat. So if you'd like a copy of these slides, you can always contact me or your own academic advisor. They can get in touch with me, and I am more than happy to give you a copy of the presentation if you'd like those for later reference. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so you can see what I see. And now once I have this up, I'm also not going to be able to see the chat, unfortunately. So if you do have questions, I'm going to stop a couple of places for questions, including at the end. However, I will not have access to the chat until the very end of this once I stop sharing my screen. So just as a heads up. Here we go. And so everybody should see a PowerPoint right now, right? Very good. Okay. All right. So tonight, we're going to be talking about some APA. All right, we'll be going over different types of in-text citations, different types of reference page citations, a little bit about the research guides and resources that are at your disposal, and some time at the end for Q&A. Typically, this runs about 45 minutes. And again, I'll be stopping occasionally for questions. Now, I want to start off talking about in-text citations. In APA, there are a couple of hard and fast rules, things that you always want to be careful about. You know, APA is all about making sure that the things that you are referencing are being given proper credit. And every different type of resource has its own method of citation. They're all very similar, but they are different. Whenever you are quoting, summarizing, paraphrasing, or otherwise referencing one of your sources, you're going to want to include two things. The first is an in-text citation. And the in-text citation, this is actually going to go within your paper, in the body of your paper, in your sentence. There's going to be an in-text citation at the end of it. And that those are very short, but they let the reader know that this is something that came from somewhere else. Whenever you make an in-text citation, there also needs to be at the end of your paper a matching reference entry. Okay, the in-text citation just tells them a little, but it's a cue for them to check out the back of your paper, because that's where they're going to get all the rest of the information. So whenever you are talking about a source, you need to make sure that you have both. All right, something in the body of your paper and then something, a longer thing at the end of your paper. Now, the basic in-text citation is right here at the top of your screen. If there's just one author, in-text citation. Heavy social media use can be linked to depression and other mental disorders in teens. And then at the end of that, there is open parentheses, Asmalash, which is the author's name, comma, 2019. And that is the year that source was published, close parentheses. And then a period. All right, the in-text citation is a part of your sentence. It always occurs before your punctuation. It looks weird, if I'm being perfectly honest. It takes a long time to get used to. It took me a long time to get used to, but that is correct. It's a part of your sentence. It belongs before the punctuation, but it's just in parentheses, author's name, last name, comma, year published. Basic citation. It's very simple. If you're citing something, though, that does not have an author, then you can use the organization that your source came from, if you know that. So in this case, in the second one there, that was from the World Health Organization in 2018. There was no attributed author to that paper, to that website, but they know it was from the WHO. And if you notice, they don't say WHO, they do say World Health Organization. If there is not a date on your in-text citations, then you want to use the abbreviation ND or no date. So again, on the bottom here, it's from the American Psychological Association. Which is abbreviated APA. Those are the people who came up with APA format. American Psychological Association, comma, ND. So there's nowhere in this sources list a date. In a lot of cases, websites are missing dates. That's very true, especially when you're using good sources, dates are pretty common. But as you start to get outside of newspapers and journals and academic articles, scholarly sources, then dates can sometimes float away, especially true online. So ND will let them know there's not a date attributed. So far, pretty simple. There are, though, other ways that you can cite. So when you are referencing things that are in your paper, now at the bottom of this, I'm going to talk about a direct quote, and that's the way that most of us learned how to include citations. Direct quotes can be really useful, but they should always be short. And often they can be really clunky because you're taking somebody else's writing and trying to kind of jam it into the middle of your writing. So often it's much easier to paraphrase, which is just restating the information in your own words. And sometimes, frequently, certainly in my case, frequently, you can use the author's name in your paraphrase. So it feels weird to have to then cite the same names in a traditional citation. It's weird to have it both in the sentence and in the citation. So APA includes this. So Gaston Verona has found that the most important element in comprehending non-native speech is familiarity with the topic. So Gaston Veronas are a part of your sentence. They don't need to go into your citation. Instead, you can just simply put 1984, which is the year of the source, in parentheses next to Gaston Veronas, and that counts. All right, that is a completely valid citation for your sentence. And again, I find that to be really, really useful. A lot of times, especially at the grad level, again, direct quotes are nice, but you want things in your own words. You want to make sure that your paper is composed of your own writing. And honestly, it's something that demonstrates to your professors that you understand this. You're not just regurgitating exactly what you saw on the paper. You're able, you comprehend it and can state it again in your own words. That counts for something. That shows a level of understanding. So when you do that, you can use the authors in your sentence and just stick the date next to their names. And that's a correct citation. Now, if you are writing about something in your topic that occurred in multiple sources, and you want to give credit to both sources equally, you can use a single citation that includes both parties' information. So in that middle example there, the end citation is Gaston Veronas, 1984, semicolon, Craig and Thomas, 2004. Close parentheses, and again, period at the end, as always. Rather than having to do open quote, name, date, close quote, open quote, name, date, close quote, you can put them together in a single parenthetical. And it looks cleaner and it conveys the same information. Okay, if you do need a direct quote, sometimes it's just the best way to do it. There's no better way to put it than the way the authors put it. So it can look like this. Gaston Veronas, 1984, found that the listener's familiarity with the topic of discourse greatly facilitates the interpretation of the entire message. Close quote. Page 85, period. So again, Gaston Veronas are a part of the sentence. You don't need them. 1984 is the date. But at the end of that direct quote, they have a page number. When there is a longer source, something like a book, there's at least 85 pages in this book. So rather than just direct them to the book, you want to try and give them information that's really useful to them. If your reader likes your paper and wants to find out more about what what you've had to read, you don't want to make them read 85 pages. So let them know it's on page 85. And this is a bit of a judgment call, when you need to use these things. You can find pages, you can find paragraphs that get cited like that if it's a longer work. If it's a pretty short little essay or a single page web page, you can probably go without. But when it's something longer like a book, that page number will help make sure that your sources are right on target. They know exactly what part of the text you're referring to. If there are 3 or more authors in your source, and this happens a lot with textbooks. If you ever need to cite your textbook, often they can be an amalgamation of a bunch of different authors. They've taken a lot of different pieces and molded them together into a textbook. Tremblay et al. The first person listed is considered the primary author of your source, and then everybody else can be lumped under et al. It's Latin. I think it means and everything else, basically. But Tremblay et al. 2010. And again, that's good enough. You don't have to write out all of the authors all of the time. And something I didn't mention at the start of this actually is that APA recently went through a shift. If you've been a student for a long time, or you were in school years ago and you've come back, citation languages are rarely updated, but it does occasionally happen. And APA just switched from the 6th edition to the 7th edition. And in the 7th edition, they streamlined a lot. It's if you're a grammar nerd like me, it's very exciting. But what it really means for students is that things just got a lot easier. One of the ways they have that 3 or more authors, the et al, is now used. If there's just 3 people, et al is good enough. And again, just a nice way to condense and make sure that you're still getting yourself across in the shortest way possible. Now, if you have a longer quotation, and again, longer quotations are to be used sparingly, but if something is more than 40 words, that's a hefty thing. That's basically a paragraph that you're quoting. They have their own special formatting. I'll be honest, this isn't a great example of this because it doesn't have context to it. But if you notice, we've got this long quote here. This suggests a familiarity with non-native speech, so on and so forth. If you don't want to stick that in the middle of your own paragraph, because that's going to be a paragraph that takes up an entire page. This is essentially a paragraph in and of itself. So a large quote like this, it gets its own mini paragraph in your paper. You're going to indent an extra time. The entire paragraph gets indented. It all gets pushed over the way that this text is pushed over. There is no first indent. It just exists as a block quote. And then at the end, it has a traditional citation. Gas and Veronis, 1984, page 77 in this case. But a block quote like this, it's going to stand out in your paper. It's going to look very, very conspicuous. And again, long quotes are something that you don't need to do a ton of. In fact, I warn against them unless there's really, truly no other way to say it. But when you need to, this is a nice way to, again, just let that stand out. Let it be its own little piece of the paper and give the context that it needs. So it just exists as this single block quote. Okay, my last little bit here, and then I'm going to pause for any questions that you guys have. So things to remember about in-text citations. First, citations are required for every source you use in your paper. And I said this at the start, but it's worth repeating. If you have an in-text citation, it must be in your reference page at the end. These early citations, as you saw, are very minimal. It's name, date, maybe a page number, and that's it. But that's because it's got an entry on your reference page. But if there's an in-text citation, there must be an entry on the reference page. And at the end there, if there's an entry on your reference page, there should be an in-text citation somewhere in your paper. It's a good rule of thumb. In-text citations should always follow or be featured in the sentences they are being used in. Right? These don't occur at the end of paragraphs. They're not footnotes. At the end of the sentence where the reference is used, that is where your in-text citation goes. And again, always within the punctuation. For in-text citations, there are going to be different entries for no dates, no authors, etc. But for the most part, when in doubt, the only two things you need are the author and the year of publication. If you're not quite sure where to go, that is always your baseline. And very rarely will that steer you wrong. And so that was a lot of information. I'm going to pause here before we go on to anything else, but questions on any of the in-text citation information or anything that I just talked about? And again, I apologize, I cannot see the chat, but please feel free to speak out if there's anything at all. Okay. So I'm going to assume that we are all good. And let's talk for a minute about reference pages. Okay. Just like in-text citations, there are different formats for different circumstances, and in this case, different types of sources. Your standard reference entry for just a regular old book looks like so. Now at the bottom here is where you actually see the reference entry, but it's going to include the author, which is the last name, and then the first initial and middle initial if they give it, the publication date, the title in italics, and only the first word of the title and subtitle are capitalized. Again, it's one of those weird things. I don't quite know why that is, but that's just the way it always is. The publisher. There used to be more information required on that. You used to have to know the date that it was published or the location rather that it was published. That stuff is all gone in the new 7th edition. So just whoever the publisher is. And if you got the book online, you want to use the DOI if available. The DOI, it stands for Direct Object Identifier. It's like a social security number for a book. All right, if you have the DOI, anybody can put that into like a library or a database, and it's always going to go exactly to that source. There's very little confusion if you have a DOI and somebody wants to look up your source. It's a very handy little number. You'll see it. You'll see an example of it, I think, on the next page. But the DOI is a very handy little thing if you've got it. If you have a URL that'll work for your readers, you can include that. For articles, it's going to you again want to go to a reverse that. For articles, you want to actually use the information of the journal or the source where it was found. You don't want to put the name of your journal. You don't want to put the name of your search engine or anything like that. You don't want to put the post library as part of your source because you got this through a journal in the post library. You want to treat it as if you had like the paper magazine in front of you. There are a few different places where you can check yourself if you're ever not quite sure how something is supposed to appear. I'm going to go over them a little later. But again, as a quick example of what a regular old book is going to look like, Post.E, Emily Post, published in 1923. And if you notice, there is a period after 1923, Etiquette in Society, in Business, in Politics, and at Home, period. Funk and Wagnalls is the publisher. And http://bartleby.com/95 is the place where they found that version of Emily Post's famous book. Again, there used to have to be a lot more information. You used to have a little retrieved from identifier. There used to be more publisher information involved, but this is fairly simple and straightforward. Last name, first initial, year, title, publisher, website if you've got one. If this is an article, and often in your classes, you're going to be looking at articles. All right, the author's name is the same, last name and first middle initials. The date of publication of the article, as specific as you can make it. If you've got the year and month, great. If you've got the year, month, and day, if it was in a newspaper or something, then you can do that too. The title of the article, capitalizing only the first word. The title of the publication is in italics in this case, not the title of the article, but so the New York Times or Newsweek would be in italics. The volume number, the issue number, the page number, any of that information that you've got on your from your source, you want to include. And depending on what you're looking at, if you're looking at a magazine versus the New York Times versus the Oxford English Dictionary, you're going to have a lot of different information. So pick what's there. If there's a volume, use the volume. If there's an issue, use the issue. If there's a page number, use the page number. And same deal, if you got this online, and often you're going to, you want to include the DOI or the URL if they will work for readers. And the reason it's saying that is sometimes your URLs don't. You need a special subscription to get into this website, or it's going to lead you down some weird little Google rabbit hole. Use URLs that work if you want to include a URL. So here are a couple different examples of exactly that. So in a journal, you have Blattner J and Bacigalupo A, published in 2007, using emotional intelligence to develop executive leadership and team organizational development, period. In Consulting Psychology Journal, Practice and Research is the name of the publication. And that is, looks like volume 59, issue 3, pages 209 to 219. And there at the very end, you can find a DOI. All right, that's what a DOI looks like. Now, a magazine, for example, is a whole lot different, or a whole lot simpler, I should say, not different, but simpler. Sweeney G, 2006, the May-June issue, so there's only 6 issues a year of this. Designing Babies, the Eugenics Race with China. And this is the Futurist, issue 40, pages 18 to 21, excuse me. And then the newspaper article is going to look very much the same. You got the name, you have the date, and this is the exact date because it's a newspaper, so it's every day. The title, the publication, and page 1A, front page story. So different, but similar. Now, there are a lot more types of references these days than just journals and newspapers. So you may find a number of different places that are going to have the information you need. And you want to make sure you're giving credit to wherever that best source is. So if it's a web page or social media, the author if known, if no author, you can start with the title of your article. The date of publication, if there's not a date, use ND like before. The title of the web page in italics. The publisher, if you know it. And if the publisher and author are the same, you don't need this. And the URL of the web page. So again, fairly basic, just name, date, title, publisher, URL. Again, similar, but different. Now, something also worth mentioning on the web page, y'all have been around the internet. It's very possible to find information that seems like it's useful, but you don't have an author or a date of publication. And maybe there isn't even a title on the web page. If you're missing a lot of this information, I would be very careful with those sources. Okay. In college, at the grad level, we're really looking for scholarly sources that support your work. And most scholarly sources are going to have this information. So if you're missing too much of this, I would be very, very careful with the information that came out of that source. It might be perfectly valid, but often I find, as a teacher and as a student, I found that the sources that come through and don't have some of this basic information, maybe the information is correct, but there might be a better place you can pull that from. But this is definitely something you're going to be using. Web pages, social media, they're everywhere. They've got tons of information on them. You'll use them for sure. Just be careful. So some examples of that. Web page, claustrophobia. Again, there's no author on this. So they start with instead just the title, claustrophobia. 2019, May 7th. And the URL. Very basic, very simple. In this case, a web page with an author. Again, it's not a person, but we know it's the American Cancer Society. 2019, Genetics and Cancer, and the URL for cancer.org. And if you notice, it's not just cancer.org. It is cancer.org/cancer/cancer causes/genetics.html. All right, it is the most specific website they can give. All right, you don't just want to give cancer.org. That site is huge. That's not a helpful link. You want this to be helpful. And then more and more people are using YouTube videos, podcasts, just different types of, newer sources that are going to be able to audio recordings, that should also be cited. But it really is the same thing. The Howcast, 2010, October 29th, how to recognize claustrophobia symptoms. And in brackets there, they have video. And it's in YouTube because they are the publisher, and the YouTube link. And you're going to find that there are, again, if it's a podcast, if it's an audio cassette, if it's anything like that, that they all kind of work exactly this way, except instead of video, you would say podcast, or whatever the actual physical source is. So the reference page itself should always start with references written at the top. And everything on your reference page should have a hanging indent. And I believe I have an example of what that looks like coming up. But a hanging indent looks a little bit like the state of Oklahoma, just sort of 180 degrees, or like a sauce pot. The start of every reference is at the margin with the author and everything else. But if your reference spills onto a second page, the second, third, fourth lines of everything all get an indent. And there's actually a way for Microsoft Word to do this. All right, you don't have to do it yourself. You don't have to hit the space bar a million times. If you highlight your reference and right click, there is a link under, I believe it's formatting, where you can choose the kind of indent you want. You can actually select hanging indent. It is an option in Microsoft Word to create a hanging indent. But you're going to see when the reference page comes up, hanging indents make your reference page look much cleaner. They identify the exact start of each of your sources. I've never seen another use for a hanging indent besides reference pages, so it's not something that especially newer students are used to. But I strongly encourage you to to learn how to do it. It's simple and it makes your reference page look great. And it's also, it's also part of the format. It is expected, but it is definitely an easy thing to overlook if you're not careful. All sources are in alphabetical order, and that's alphabetical order by the name of the primary author. So whatever that first last name is, or if you don't have an author, then the title of the page, they should go in alphabetical order that way, from A to Z, top to bottom. Different submission types, different sources. That's exactly what we were just talking about. Depending on the type of source it is, they're all going to look a little different. And I'm going to say it one more time. Any source used must be listed in your reference page, and it should be cited in the body of your paper. If it's on the reference page, it should be in your paper. If it's in the middle of your paper, it should be in the reference page. Questions on any of those references that I brought up, or questions on the reference page in general? Again, I have an example in a slide or two of exactly what that looks like, but anything that I've mentioned so far that you had a question on? Okay. All right, great. So let's talk a little bit about research guides and other resources. So the Trareg Library Online is Post's main reference library. And if you're a main campus student, or you live in Connecticut and you want to come to the campus, there is a physical Trareg library there as well. You can walk in and check out the books. You can meet the librarians. But we also have our online version, and that is what our online students are going to use all the time. Your classes will direct you there often. It is also usually the best place to find resources, because if it's in the Trareg library, then it's something that we know where it came from. The majority of your online research should start there. And When you first log into, if you've never been there by some chance, when you get into Blackboard, there's that purple stripe at the top, and you will see a link to Blackboard for your classes, student services, where you're going to find our friends at TutorMe, and you're going to find our Center for Academic Success and a bunch of other stuff, our software hub, a lot of good stuff on the student services tab. The next step is the library. And when you click library, it's going to land you here. So if you scroll down on this, most people, when you're going to go search for something, you're going to click on that search bar. It's going to bring you to the eSearch. But if you scroll down, you're actually going to find a wealth of resources. Okay, depending on the degree you're pursuing, your dean has actually put together a huge list of resources that he or she believes is going to help students pursuing a degree in their school. So the School of Arts and Sciences, now if you're in the grad program, I don't think we have any grad programs that run in arts and sciences, but Dean Klein has put together a whole bunch of these references. Some of them look very similar. You're going to find EBSCOhost is going to be on all of them. But School of Arts and Sciences, it's got a giant list. If you keep scrolling, you'll find the Malcolm Baldrige School of Business for the MBA students, my people. And the John Berger School of Public Service and Education. You're going to find all these education resources. So these are all things that have been put together for you, and these are great places to start looking if you're not quite sure where to look. All right, and two things I'm just going to point you towards really quickly. These aren't necessarily here for APA, but on the right-hand column of all three, you're going to see a link to Academic Writer. It's kind of right there in the middle of the page on the right-hand side. And right below it is Grammarly Premium. Academic Writer is a fantastic research for APA style. All right. If you are not sure that you're doing APA correctly, you can always go to our library, go to Academic Writer, and there's a lot of wonderful tutorials, references, things that you can check yourself against to make sure that you are using APA the proper way for the source or the instance that you have. There's also a third-party site online, the Purdue Online Writing Laboratory, the Purdue OWL. So that's an online writing lab. The OWL is kind of the gold standard for APA. Academic Writer is wonderful. I recommend them every time, but you can also go to the Purdue OWL. If you haven't been there, check them out. They're a little dry, but they've got everything you need. It's nice and clean. It's wonderfully resourced, and you can't go wrong checking yourself against the Purdue OWL or against Academic Writer. And Grammarly Premium, this is a pay service that you are getting as a part of your tuition with Post. So if you do not have Grammarly, go get Grammarly. If you're paying for it out of your own pocket, stop and get it here instead. Because as a Post student, it is a part of your tuition. But Grammarly is kind of like a spell check and grammar check, like on steroids. It can double check you from your browser. I think there's one from your phone. It can go into your email. And they're fantastic. They're going to not just double check your spelling, but they're going to make sure your sentences make sense. They're going to notice things, even advanced things, like they're going to see if you use the same word 3 times in one paragraph, they're going to point it out to you. And maybe that's exactly the way it needs to be, but maybe it's not. Grammarly is a wonderful resource, and your classmates are using it, your instructors are using it, your advisors are using it. You should absolutely be using it. So if you have not gone to Grammarly, go to the library tab, scroll down to these databases, find Grammarly. It will change your life. Now, we also have our friends at American Sentinel. They have their own virtual library here. So if any of you are American Sentinel students, there are excellent resources through American Sentinel as well. Now, American Sentinel, we merged with them a little while ago, and so there's a lot of their own resources they keep. They run very specialized programs, and so we want to make sure that our American Sentinel students have access to all of those excellent resources. You're going to see a library that looks a lot like this. All right, and this is something that I'm honestly personally a lot less familiar with the American Sentinel library, but they have some really excellent library information on anything going on. Personally, they have librarians that are keeping all of this information updated. There are specific articles and links. Like right now it's June, so it's Pride Month. Some great stuff about Pride Month and how it relates to their nursing programs. There's some tutorials on how to find things in their library database, setting up keyword searches. There's a PDF on how to access the virtual library. Again, it's going to look a little different, but the heart of their library is exactly the same as the Post library that I just showed you. So yeah, use the Post library, use the American Sentinel library. There's so much there, and it's going to make sure that you're using the right kind of sources for your papers. And and I'm so sorry, I thought I had a reference page on here. I don't. I can certainly go find one to try and explain a little bit of what I was talking about. But before I go digging into any of that, questions on anything that I talked about? I went over a lot of information in fairly short order, I realize. But anything I talked about that you have other questions on, or anything that I didn't talk about that you were wondering? Okay. All right. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. Definitely if something comes up, if you have questions that suddenly occur to you and you want to know more, again, reach out to me. My email address is there in the chat, akingsley@post.edu. Contact your advisor as well. They can give you a copy of tonight's presentation, or they can put you in contact with me. I do want to see if I can find a copy of the son of a gun. And I'm so sorry, I don't actually have a copy of that reference page. I thought I had it right here. Well, I apologize for that, but definitely check out APA Style Central. It's going to have exactly what I am talking about. Yeah, we do have one question. Yes, please. What can I do? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can. Hello.
Oh yeah, my name is Luz.
Hi, Luz.
I want to know how long time you can get the New York Times application in the internet. New York Times.
So
how long during
the New York Times that you're going to find in our classes often, they are things that are embedded in our library. The Times itself, I don't.
Yeah, because I see that it's a $1 a week, but when you got in the college, they keep it free.
That's a really good question, and I know we've done things like that in the past. I will be perfectly honest with you. I don't know the answer to that offhand. That is, and I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. I can find out for you. I definitely can.
Okay.
Send me an email and remind me of that question. And in the morning, when everybody's awake again, I will find out that answer and I will let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Any questions or anything else that I talked about tonight that you wanted more information on, or anything I didn't talk about tonight that you would like to discuss? Okay. Okay, great. Well, if there's no other questions, then I will bring this to a close a little bit early. But I really appreciate everybody showing up tonight. I hope this was helpful. Again, if you'd like a copy of the slides, reach out to me or reach out to your advisor, and they can reach out to me and I can get you a copy of everything. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope everybody has a great night.